The Hoover Dam, an engineering marvel that had stood tall since the 1930s, was a symbol of human innovation and resilience, holding back the mighty Colorado River and providing power and water to millions across Nevada, Arizona, and California. On a scorching summer day, the atmosphere around the dam felt heavy, as if the desert itself was whispering an omen. Tourists walked along the observation deck, snapping photos of the breathtaking canyon and the endless expanse of Lake Mead, unaware that deep within the dam's concrete heart, hairline fractures had been slowly widening, pushed to the edge by years of pressure, drought cycles, and unrelenting heat. What was once thought to be invincible was now teetering dangerously close to collapse. Inside the control room, engineers monitored screens filled with numbers and graphs. At first, the fluctuations seemed minor, just spikes in water pressure and slight vibrations. But as hours passed, alarms blared louder and instruments went wild, signaling that the structure was under severe strain. The dam's foundations groaned like a wounded beast, sending vibrations through the canyon walls. Panic began to set in as staff rushed to call emergency services and initiate evacuation protocols. The situation escalated faster than anyone could have imagined, with every second counting toward an unstoppable disaster. Without warning, a thunderous crack echoed through the canyon, startling tourists and staff alike. Pieces of concrete the size of cars tumbled from the upper face of the dam, sending plumes of dust into the air. People screamed as they scrambled to escape the observation decks, some dropping cameras and bags in their desperate rush. Onlookers could hardly believe their eyes as the mighty Hoover Dam, once considered indestructible, began to crumble before them. The raw force of the Colorado River, held back for decades, pressed harder and harder against the weakening barrier. Within moments, the unthinkable happened. The central portion of the dam gave way with an earth-shaking roar, releasing a wall of water that exploded through the canyon like a beast finally set free. The unleashed torrent raced downstream, tearing through everything in its path with unimaginable speed and power. Entire sections of roadways, power lines, and bridges were swallowed, while the riverbanks collapsed into chaos. Communities downstream had only minutes to react as emergency sirens wailed across towns and cities, warning people to flee before the flood consumed them. The destruction was biblical in scale. Houses near the river were swept away like toy blocks, cars flipped and spun helplessly, and farmland that had depended on irrigation from the dam was drowned under roaring brown waves. In Las Vegas and other cities farther away, panic spread as news outlets broadcast live footage of the catastrophe. The images were haunting. Helicopters hovered over the raging water, filming boats overturned, people stranded on rooftops, and entire neighborhoods swallowed. It was a tragedy that the modern United States had never witnessed, shaking the nation to its core. Rescue operations began almost instantly. The National Guard, emergency responders, and volunteers worked day and night to save lives, airlifting survivors from rooftops and pulling others from the raging currents. Makeshift shelters were set up in schools and stadiums, where displaced families gathered in shock, grieving their losses while clinging to hope. The dam's collapse had not only destroyed infrastructure, but also disrupted power grids and water supply systems across multiple states, plunging millions into darkness and scarcity. In the aftermath, questions arose. How could such a colossal structure fail? Investigators examined every possible cause: aging infrastructure, years of drought weakening the foundation, and even the possibility of seismic activity in the region. Public anger grew as officials faced accusations of neglect, while experts warned that other aging dams across the country could face similar fates if not properly reinforced. The collapse of Hoover Dam was not just a physical disaster, but also a wake-up call about humanity's fragile control over nature. Months later, the canyon stood scarred and broken, the once proud Hoover Dam reduced to rubble, and Lake Mead drained into a chaotic new riverbed. For survivors, life would never be the same. The disaster had taken thousands of lives, reshaped entire communities, and rewritten history. Yet, amidst the ruins, there was resilience. People rebuilt, honoring the memory of those lost while striving to learn from the mistakes that had allowed the tragedy to unfold. The fall of Hoover Dam became both a lesson and a legend, a reminder that even the greatest human achievements are never beyond the reach of time, nature, and fate. The days immediately following the collapse were marked by chaos, sorrow, and disbelief. The once thriving towns downstream of the Hoover Dam were reduced to haunting wastelands. Survivors wandered through debris-strewn streets, searching desperately for loved ones who had been swept away in the deluge. The riverbanks were lined with the wreckage of homes, cars, and broken infrastructure, and the stench of stagnant water and oil filled the air. Makeshift memorials began to appear on what remained of bridges and roadsides, where people left flowers, photographs, and handwritten notes for those who never returned. The silence of mourning was occasionally broken by the whirring of helicopters and the distant cries of rescue teams, still pulling survivors from the flood's grip. Beyond the physical destruction, the dam's collapse unleashed a cascade of crises across the western United States. Power outages rolled through Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California as the dam's hydroelectric stations were obliterated. Millions found themselves without electricity in the scorching desert heat, reliant on dwindling supplies of fuel and backup generators. Water shortages followed, as Lake Mead's reservoir emptied into the Colorado River's rampage, leaving treatment plants dry and irrigation systems paralyzed. Farmers, already struggling with years of drought, saw their crops wilt in the fields, while ranchers mourned the drowning of cattle herds. The collapse had transformed a regional lifeline into a national emergency almost overnight. The human toll deepened with every passing day. Hospitals overflowed with the injured, many suffering from broken bones, hypothermia, or infections caused by contaminated water. Volunteers arrived in droves from neighboring states, bringing medical supplies, food, and bottled water. Yet the scale of need dwarfed the resources at hand. Parents clutched their children tightly in crowded shelters, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear of an uncertain future. In news broadcasts, survivors shared harrowing accounts of clinging to rooftops for hours before being rescued, of watching neighbors swept away, of losing everything they had worked their lives to build. The collapse was not just a physical tragedy, but a shattering of trust in the systems meant to protect them.